Hello, I see you all joining in. What a pleasure to start the day off with you all. Thanks for joining us. I see some of you connecting to the audio, getting settled in. Some familiar names in here. Some new folks too. So please take a moment to briefly introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us what organization you're from. Maybe you want to share what your favorite coffee flavor is or what you had this morning. We're all in community here, and we'll be seeing much of each other. So as folks continue to join in, playing some light music, and we'll get started in just a minute. I see Catherine here. Hello. Also Rosa, with a very cool background, you two, from NAMI Miami. Barry. Sharon's here too, a good friend of ours. Alan is there too. Awesome. Cool, folks. So as I said, it's a true treat to be able to spend the morning with you all. We're so honored to be able to be in a room full of social innovators that are ready to make their spaces more accessible and inclusive. So thank you all for joining us on this journey. I am Andreina Weichselbaumer. I'm the Director of Culture and Strategy at Radical Partners, and I lead initiatives with our organization and fellow partners of ours to be diverse, equitable, inclusive, and to create spaces where people of all abilities, perspectives, and backgrounds experience that true sense of belonging. Radical Partners is a social impact accelerator. We invest in leaders, engage locals, and co-design solutions, all in the effort to collectively make our community stronger. This is one of our channels to achieve that. So welcome to our basic training to strengthen your organization's disability, accessibility, and inclusion. And together we're going to be exploring content, tools, and best practices to get each of us closer to that goal as part one of a two-part series. Next year in March, we will all come back to share out our strategies and what we've begun implementing so we can hold each other accountable and start implementing our learnings together and feel that sense of community. So I'll give a brief description of our virtual space. We're all here joining online, and we've got people joining from all across Miami, very close partners of ours. We've got our facilitators online as well, Debbie Dietz, Shelley Bayer, and Heido Arana. And we've got ASL interpreters, Jessica and Beth here too. And we're all looking at a big screen and taking a look at our slides as we shuffle through, and are also able to click through all of the video and faces of folks that have joined us. We also have captions available on Zoom. So if you click the CC closed captions button at the bottom, you'll be able to see the subtitles. And this is an hour-and-a-half long session. So we've built in moments to pause, reflect, and share out. And if you need to take a break, stand up, sit down, stretch, or lay on the floor to keep your mind and body fresh, please do so. We are ready to get started. So this training gets started all with hi, I see folks joining us. Thanks so much. Hey, Julia. We are elated that you've all joined us today and are sharing this urgency to create more accessible and inclusive spaces within your teams, your programs, and your organizations. And thanks to the community grant that is offered by the Miami Foundation, we launched this initiative in the fall of last year to bridge gaps in our local social impact ecosystems, disability, accessibility, and inclusion. And our key pillars involve increasing awareness about the experiences of folks living with disabilities. We're fostering collaborations between nonprofit organizations or social impact ventures with disability advocacy organizations, and offering financial support as well to cover the costs of providing accessibility services for programs, events, materials design, team experiences, and more. So I'll be sharing more about that. And through collaborating and creating these spaces where we can each learn together and share our experiences together, we are able to hold each other accountable for putting disability inclusion in each of our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging strategies. So I'll share more about that at the end of our session because we've got a lot of perks coming your way to help make this possible. But for the purpose of today, I'm already welcoming you and introducing you to our initiative. We will get to listen to our guest facilitators online today, Debbie, Shelley, and Heido, on how to best implement practices that you can start right now. We'll transition over and we'll start learning about insiders' perspectives around environment and how you can set folks up for success. And we'll also be able to hear some personal stories today so you can better experience the lives of others in that way and connect in that way. As I keep sharing, we're going to wrap up with a couple of perks and things around next steps that will help you implement all of those things. If you've been to a Radical Partners workshop before, you know that we love our norms, and that is all to respect the space that we're in together. So I'll go through these 7 very briefly. And if you have any more suggestions, pop them in the chat. We always love to teach, but we always love to learn too. And we want to recognize that there are experts in the room because of lived experiences or because of book knowledge. So always feel free to share any learnings in the chat and feel more than welcome to ask questions. We always lift each other up before we lift ourselves. And that means that we like to be very supportive of one another, and we don't like to judge when we're in the room together. So for folks that are asking questions, don't be shy. There's no judgment here. We all belong at the table. We all have something to teach, and there's a reason why we're all here today. So feel welcome and feel like you belong too. We also like to respect the space and what folks are sharing. So if there's any distractions that are around you, please take a moment to address them. And then once you're ready to come back, be fully here with us and present to respect the time of what everybody else is sharing. And very similarly, we assume the best in others and we expect the same. Everyone is here for the positive reasons and for meeting the same goals together. And this is a power sharing experience. So we always like to offer opportunities for folks to share out. And we never pose ourselves as the experts in the room. That's why we've brought on these guest facilitators, making sure that we've got the best in the business to share the best practices. And our language of love is always pushing and shouting you out on social media. So if you're implementing a best practice, let us know about it. We want to spread the word. We want to keep building the momentum and setting a great example for our ecosystem. That said, I would love to introduce our accessibility experts today. We're joined by 3 rockstar facilitators today, and we're all online together. So Debbie Dietz will come up first, and she is the executive director and one of the founders of Disability Independence Group. And Disability Independence Group is a nonprofit law firm and legal advocacy center. So they use litigation, education, and other forms of advocacy to protect and defend the rights of people with disabilities. She's created and delivered hundreds of trainings, which is an absolute pro, with people with disabilities, their families, and caregivers. And these include the ASL Video Project for HUD and the Wallet Card Project, which is a nationally organized, a nationally recognized outreach effort to people with disabilities, and also Miami-Dade County's very first video series at the intersection of disability and domestic violence and sexual assault. We also have Rochelle, she goes by Shelley Baer here. She's the director and leadership of the leadership training initiatives at University of Miami School of Medicine Mailman Center for Childhood Development. She's a licensed clinical social worker and coordinates the Emerging Transformational Leadership Program, ETLP, and the Project Self-Advocate Leadership Training, SALT, which aims to teach a leadership skills curriculum to individuals with disabilities so that they can in turn learn strategies to advocate for themselves and others to affect larger systems level change. And we've got her colleague Heido Arana here as well. He is a clinical program coordinator at University of Miami and really moves mountains for the autism community. He was a screenwriter and a freelance writer, and is writing a fantasy novel as well. I also want to shout out our ASL interpreters on the call here from the WAG group, run by Beth, and Jessica is here joining us as well. Beth is the CEO of WAG, the Workplace Accessibility Group, and their team transforms organizations into inclusive places to work, and they remove the disability barriers in the workplace. She identifies as hearing, although she wears hearing aids, is passionate about inclusion, loves American Sign Language, and provides ASL interpreting as she is today. Educates businesses about ADA, including Radical Partners, they're very close friends, and provides tools for accessible workplaces. With that, Debbie, I'll pass the mic over to you so that you can get us started.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Well, as you heard, my name is Debbie Dietz, and I'm the Executive Director of Disability Independence Group, and very happy to be here today and talk to you about accessibility. As you can see, the word image that I put on the screen, I talk about words that relate to accessibility, effective communication, materials that are accessible, an accessible environment. And that's really what you're going to hear about and watch videos today about. So I'm just gonna, let's just get started and switch to the next screen. We have two videos to show you today. Both of these videos are made by the Ford Foundation that has a big disability awareness project. And I picked these two out because I think they really set the tone for our discussion today. So if you don't mind, then would start the videos, that would be great. I don't hear the sound.
The stigma surrounding disability varies from culture to culture, but ultimately the assumptions come down to a point that people with disabilities are not capable, cannot be independent, there's something that needs to be fixed. The narrative that we should have is that actually disability is a beautiful part of our identity, is a beautiful part of our society. It's an asset. When the person is not able to do something, it's not because they cannot, it's because the system is not accessible. It's because the system is not inclusive. So by recognizing that, by fixing the system on both the technical level and the active level, people with disabilities can really embrace their own disability in a positive way and see it as an asset. My name is Sarah Mikera. There are 1 billion individuals in this world with disability. That's 1/7 of the world population. It's the largest marginalized group in the world in many different ways, from the education sector, employment, health sector. So everyone needs to be involved in changing the narrative. The global community has been moving towards recognizing that people with disability are part of the system, should be at the table discussing the policies as well. And we cannot talk about alleviation of poverty without talking about people with disability. We cannot be talking about educating everyone without talking about people with disabilities. Disability rights is the next movement in the sense that it's part of all other existent movements. In every single sector, in every single space, people with disabilities are people with potential, people that can contribute, people that bring value. And when we don't integrate people with disabilities into the society, we are losing out. Everyone's losing out. It's not a charity-based perspective. It's not just human rights. It's a value-based perspective. The inclusion of all is a value for all. The stigma surrounding disability varies from culture to culture.
Apologies, y'all. Ready for the next one, Beth? Cool.
My name is Carrie Gray. Carrie Gray is a Black disabled woman, and there's power behind that. In the United States, 1 in 4 in the Black community have some type of disability, whether that's visible or invisible. Historically speaking, organizations and institutions have shown us that they want to identify with one thing and build power around that, build influence and access. And I get it, right? So this idea that you have disability rights, you have women's rights, you have LGBTQ rights, and those kind of different pockets are really building a strong narrative. But the thing that I find to be harmful is when we're not building in coalition. Because the reality is that you have people like myself who are Black, disabled, and women, and so many other things. And when you live at the intersections of all three of those, then you can't split your political and social dynamics between these different groups. It doesn't produce real results of freedom, and it doesn't produce real results of access to employment and other opportunities that you're looking for. I'll give one example on this. So the Black Lives Matter movement, when it was created in conjunction mostly with a lot of young folks. What was unique about this particular movement was the intersectional philosophy that was built upon. The folks getting up and saying, we are not just fighting for one narrative, but we are specifically fighting for folks who are on the margins. We are fighting for Black folks who are also LGBTQ, who are women, who are femme, who are trans, who are disabled. They named it. They saw their people across the country and said, I'm fighting for all of you. Not just some of you, not just the ones that have traditionally gained power and access. And that gives me a lot of hope because no one wants to be left behind.
Thank you so much. So the two videos and the two women speaking in the videos really touch at the heart of what we're doing today, which is communicating with organizations, whether they be disability organizations or organizations that aren't disability focused, and how do we bring everybody into what we do and make sure that the messages that your specific organizations have aren't unintentionally leaving anybody out. And that can be from your messaging to your materials, to your social media posts, to where you host your events or how you host your events. And that's really what I'm going to talk about today over the next 20 or so minutes. And what's interesting is society was always built on this conception of able-bodied people. And people with disabilities really weren't thought of when we were building all the components of our society today. And we're really looking at evolving that and changing that as we move forward. And technology, the internet has really helped level the playing field and allowing as many people as possible to be accessible. So it's really an exciting time for people with disabilities and really a good time to share all this information with all of the organizations that are here today. So I love this picture, and I love to start with this picture because it really shows you where the disability movement is and where it is going in the future. And if you look at the first slide, and we're going to talk about all four of the pictures within this one picture, all the way to the left where it says reality. The reality is for people with disabilities that if they were to watch the game, this baseball game or life, they're not getting the same experiences as other people. So you'll see that there's one person that has 6 boxes, and they can beyond see over the fence and see the game. And then you've got the child in the middle with one box. That box helps that child see the game. And then you've got the other person, not only do they not have a box, but they're in a hole, really creating barriers to being able to see the baseball game. And as we say, that is the reality. Then we talk about equality, or when we treat everyone the same. Well, if we treat everyone the same and give everybody one box, it doesn't necessarily mean that they all get the same experience. And that was what happened for people with disabilities before the ADA and before the laws that went into place to help people with disabilities get reasonable accommodations. And then you look at the third slide, the first boy doesn't have a box at all. the second one has the same one box, but then the third boy now has 2 boxes. They're not being treated equally, but they're getting an equitable experience. And so now all 3 finally, for the first time, get to see the game and have the same experience. And in terms of disability, we call this the third child getting the reasonable accommodation, and his reasonable accommodation was that he needed that box in order to see the game. It's not that he's getting something extra to have an extra advantage. No, he just needed that second box in order to be able to see the game the same way that the first 2 boys had. And we call that, as I said, in disability, a reasonable accommodation. Now look at the last picture, and this is my favorite. In this picture, notice that the fence is gone. Notice that there's no boxes. And look that all of the 3 boys are getting the same experience. In this slide, they're being treated equally and equitably. And the third boy didn't have to ask for anything special, didn't have to make sure that the second box was available. They all 3 just got to go to the game and watch the game. And that this would be the ideal, right? That, okay, yeah, someone has to ask for a reasonable accommodation, get the extra box. But imagine if they didn't even have to ask. Imagine if they didn't have to think in advance. Did I plan? Did I ask for the right accommodation? What do I need? Just imagine if they could go anywhere and everywhere and know that they'll get to see the game. Take about the stress that removes. There's a concept for this. It's called universal design. They use it in building. So don't necessarily build just stairs, but build the ramp into the design of the stairs, or just build the ramp so that there is no need for the stairs. But it also applies to programs and services. So the organizations that are here today, as you're designing your programs, your services, and your events, make sure that you don't unintentionally put up that fence or that barrier for the people you want to attend your event. So as we prepare and plan for the future, my suggestion is start thinking about accessibility from the beginning. Don't try to back it in after you've planned your event, because it's harder, it's more expensive, and it's not going to ever be as good as it could be. So as you're looking at venues and as you're planning what you're going to do, keep this idea of accessibility in your head from the beginning, because it's as easy to pick a restaurant that has accessible bathrooms as it is to pick a restaurant for your event that doesn't have accessible bathrooms. Or it's as easy to make sure there's a way to get in the front door to your event versus a sign with an arrow pointing to the side, and people that use wheelchairs have to go around the back, through the dumpsters, through the kitchen, and circle in the back just to get in the front door, because it's not going to give them a good experience or a good feeling about your organization. And we're going to talk about all of these: the invitation, the venue, the menu, your materials, and your social media, one by one. But the idea that you want to think in your head is you want to create full and equal treatment for everybody that you're interacting with. One of the things that I hate is there'll be this really cool venue, and then there's like an upstairs or a downstairs, but no elevator. And you're like, well, the people with disabilities, they can stay in this section. They don't have to go to the top floor or the bottom floor. And it just kind of makes me crazy, because you would never say, you were talking about women, well, the women can't go upstairs or in the basement. The women are just going to stay here. It's no different for disability. All right, let's go on. So the accommodation process. What I recommend is any event you're having, you want to put language on it that says if you have a disability and may require an accommodation to fully participate, please call or email and physically put someone's name to request an accommodation and give a phone number or an email address. If you put this on your invitation or your materials, you're letting people with disabilities know that you're aware that you want them at your event and that you want to include them. Now, what I find interesting and evolving is a lot of organizations, like today, we have American Sign Language interpreters here. You can put what accommodations you're going to provide without anybody having to ask for them on the invitation. And then it lets people know what to expect. So if you're going to have closed caption or American Sign Language interpreters, you can put the little symbols at the bottom on your invitation. They don't take up a lot of room. And then you're letting people know what they can expect and that they don't even have to worry about asking, because you're just providing it so that the event is inclusive. And it's really fabulous. All right, let's go on. It's always better to ask for the request in advance so you as the organization have time to prepare and make sure that you get the correct accommodation in advance. It could be related to dietary restrictions if you're serving food, requests for interpreting services or assisted living listening devices, a request for accessible parking or seating, or any other type of accommodation that someone might request. The more you get the requests in advance and make them happen, the more comfortable you're going to have somebody feel at your event and be willing and wanting and excited to attend your event. All right, let's move on. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to switch and talk about language and visual materials that you have. I always look at fonts, and you should be able to see this on the screen. The fonts you use matter, whether someone can read the information you're trying to give them or really not understand it. And if they can't understand the language that you're using, they're not going to read the information that you're trying to provide. And if you look at the samples on the slide, you're going to see that the swirly cursive writing, it's much harder to read, and you kind of got to lean in to the screen and maybe squint your eyes a little in order to be able to actually read the words. So I always recommend use clean, clear fonts, make them larger. Now, from a perspective of building a flyer, larger font means less information on it. But if you make the font small to get all that information on it, your people aren't really reading it anyway. So really think through that. There's something called serif versus sans serif. And that's serif are the tiny little feet on the ends of the letters. They make it harder for people to read that have low vision issues. So try not to use them and try to make it as clear as possible. And you can see at the bottom, you can see all those different fonts of it. That's all the same word. But look at how different the readability is depending on the font that you choose. So keep that in mind as you're designing your flyers. The next thing we're going to look at is color. Color is so important. You can use it for emotion or to set the tone. But if you don't pick colors that are readable for people, once again, they're not going to be able to understand or get the information that you're trying to let them see or read or learn. So look at the screen. You'll see we have a white background with black ink. It's very easy to read the words on the screen. But if you see the bottom where we use this pretty blue color, it's much harder to read the information, and it's harder on the eyes. It takes longer to understand. it's much more likely someone will just skip and not read those words than try to read them. And we're going to keep talking about color. Go to the next slide, please. So if you see here, there's 6 circles at the top of the screen, and there's actually numbers within those circles. Not everybody may be able to see the numbers because of the color contrast within those numbers. So color really matters, and not only the color of the ink you're using, but the background color also. And there's very easy ways to test your colors to see how accessible they are before you make your materials. And I think we're going to talk about this more in the part 2 in March, but there's a website for free where you can put your colors in, and it'll actually give you a readability and accessibility score on the color contrast. So when I do my materials, because I like to use lots of bright colors, I always put the colors and the ink color in the software and test it, and then I can adjust the colors to make sure that the colors that I'm going to use have the most accessibility or the most readability and be in compliance with best practices. And as I said, I think in part 2 we can actually share the website and test the colors, but we can get you that information during the question and answer if you guys want it, so that you can practice it over the next couple of months. All right, you want to move on? Okay, this is back to fonts and colors. Contrast is really important, and putting a background picture on your paper before you put the words really can impact how effective your materials can be. So if you see the 2 examples on the slide, you see like the yogurt dessert and the fruit in it, and then the words on top of it, versus the second image where you've got all the words on the white background and then the pictures below it. It's easier to see it without the pictures behind the words. And especially if people put very busy images behind their words, it's very hard to read what you're doing. It's also very hard for screen readers to read them digitally with all of that behind them, and you have to work harder to build in the accessibility versus just keeping the text and the images separate. All right, let's move on. Okay, also we do so much digitally now and with computers, and what's so interesting is so much of this accessibility is now automatically in the software and the programs that we use. It's just a matter of knowing where they're located in the software so that you can use them. A lot of programs, especially if you use Word-based programs like Microsoft Word, Excel, PowerPoint, they actually will check your accessibility for you in your materials, and they'll actually tell you what you're missing and how to fix it. And all it is a matter of clicking that button in the software before you release your material and have it checked. So this is one example. This is a Word document, and if you put an image embedded within your Word document, in order for a screen reader to read that image, you actually can put in something called alt text or alternative text. And what it is a written description of the image. So you can click on your picture, and then you'll see on the right side the alt text, and then you can literally write, this is the Miami Inclusion logo. It's a semicircle of arrows in blue, purple, and turquoise ink with MIA in the middle, and then the words Miami Inclusion Alliance to the right of the arrows. So that if a screen reader is reading that document out loud to somebody, the person that you're, because you usually don't want to put a picture in your document unless it's serving a purpose. the person that's listening to the document will be able to get that same message from the image that you're wanting the person that's seeing the image to see. And once again, the system will teach you and show you what to do, point out what's missing, and then you can go to the help and actually it'll talk you through and give you step by step what to do. Okay, go on. Now, social media, and we're all using social media these days. And over time, the social media is getting more and more usable for accessibility. So at first, Facebook was really complicated to make posting an image accessible. And you used to have to post it, and then once it was released, go in, edit it, add the alt text to it. But now you can do it all within the post before you post it. And I think we're going to go through the different ways of how to put in the accessibility into your social media posts. And it really matters, because if you're doing all this fabulous stuff and you're posting, but you're not making your posts accessible, you're leaving out all the people with disabilities that need that information to get your information. So let's go through the next slide. Also Zoom, like we're on today. There's so many accessibility features, and Zoom keeps adding them all the time since we started. So now we have the closed captions where you can have two choices, either bring in a third party that has kind of like an AI auto captioning, or you can actually bring in a human that types in real time, and you can assign them to be the captioner and type in your captions. You can bring in your videos. We have the interpreters here today that we now can pin so that they can be seen even if there's lots of people on the Zoom. And then if you use videos, it's very important that you have captions. Now, YouTube, you can press automated captions on YouTube. They're not very accurate, but you can use a third party, and it's like $1.25 or $1.50 a minute, and actually get captions that are accurate. And then YouTube now will actually embed these captions automatically into your videos, so that you don't really have to be technically advanced in order to make sure that your videos are captioned and that the captions are accurate for the information that you're giving. So at my organization, we just have a policy that we don't put out any videos without captions that are accurate and correct. And we think it's a best practice and recommend it for other organizations. Now, yeah, let's go on. Thanks. I think what we could do if we have time at the end is we can practice how to do a social media post, but I want to make sure that there's time left for the other speakers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks, Debbie. Would love if you have an opportunity for you to share that color contraster in the chat also. I think that's a great tool, and we use it all the time.
I will do that. Thank you.
Great. Amazing. So Shelly and Heido, I'd love to pass the microphone over to you so that you can share a little bit more with us about environmental barriers.
Hi, everybody. So good to be here. Thank you for having us. And I'm Shelly Bear. I'm the Director of Leadership Training Initiatives at the Mehlman Center. And Jairo and I are a good team because I have a visible disability. You can't really tell by looking at me in the small square, but I have a mobility disability. So I use a scooter and wheelchair for long distances, but I do walk. So I do roll sometimes. So I just wanted to put that out there so y'all know. And I don't know, Jairo, you want to share your disability? It was kind of in your intro.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jairo Arana. I assist Shelly with our pipeline leadership program, which have to do with advocacy, self-advocacy for people with disabilities, cross disabilities. And my disability is autism. I was diagnosed with Asperger's the very same year that I was added into the DSM-5 diagnostic statistics manual. So since then, I've been very involved with the autism community and the cross disability community in general, and have been working in the Mailman Center since 2017, December of 2017. So it's nice to meet you all.
Yeah, so we're glad to be here, and we're putting we have the lived experience of some of the topics Debbie had already shared. So we just have a few, I think, photos. If you go to the next slide, yeah. So which I know you're all familiar with these environmental accommodations, but really are so crucial for people with disabilities. And as Debbie eloquently said, that really until the ADA, this wasn't really thought about. And now many buildings, are mandated to have these kind of accommodation accessibility features. Before 1990, when the ADA passed, they didn't have to. So they often said they're grandfathered in, so they don't need to update their buildings. So I'm not going to, you can see what are some of these environmental accommodations that are really, really important, more for people with physical disabilities and visually impaired, as you see the Braille and elevator. So you can go to the next slide. I don't know if Hyra, do you want to share what these are?
Oh yeah, so these, yeah, thank you, Shelley. Yeah, so these are devices for people, whether it's autism or sensory, such as if they're deaf or have difficulty hearing, then these are devices, technologies that are available for the person in their workplace and even in schools. And we also see like if a person is nonverbal, for example, there's some people on the autism spectrum. There are people on the autism spectrum who are nonverbal. So what we see too on the left side of the screen, appropriate work accommodations, there are visual supports. Many people in the autism spectrum prefer very concrete, very specific language with visuals. For example, if you want to employ someone on the autism spectrum, it's always very good to let them know, what's expected of them, having rules of the job, what are their do's and don'ts of their job position. It's always good to have a schedule. It's very helpful because sometimes even time management can be a challenge for some of us on the spectrum. We like to learn by seeing and doing. So to model and demonstrate, and then we get to repeat the process. That way it's, there's something that's called like muscle memory. When you do it, your brain like absorbs that information. You've done it, so it doesn't feel alien to you. It's always good to have like a list of steps. I like to do like little check mark, or actually I don't even do check marks anymore. Now I scratch them off. That way it's visually easier for me to see like, yeah, oh, this is done. Now let's see what else. Scratch it, but not too much, so I can read it and see, oh yeah, I already did this step. Written directions, visuals if possible, and analyzing the task. That sounds a bit abstract, task analysis. Kelly, what do you think about that? Task analysis, how do you analyze a task? I guess, we talk about it. I mean, you've done that with me. Like, for example, you sometimes have asked me for my accommodation. Oh. Yeah.
Right. It made me think of Hyro when we teach, we very much, I don't know if any of you have heard this language, but there's something called plain language and easy read. So this is really important for you all to remember, because when you're designing materials or writing reports or even websites or brochures, how do you make it accessible and universal? It's called universal design for learning. Am I getting that right?
Yes, that's correct.
When we teach our leadership programs for adults with disabilities, we have cross disabilities. So we have adults who have an intellectual disability as well as a physical disability. So we have to be very inclusive, and we want to make sure our language is understandable. So easy read is more using symbols. And then plain language is, thinking of it in a more easily understandable way to share the information.
One of the challenges that I found, like, for example, when it comes to easy read and related to the autism community in particular, like some of us have very expensive languages. We might use languages considered pedantic. And then other people on the autism spectrum, that's why it's a spectrum, all won't understand because it's not a commonly used word. So the more simple, the better. And that's something that I've had to learn in this journey. So it's always good to keep that in mind. I guess simpler is better, as simple as possible.
Yes. Okay, I think you can go to the next.
Yeah, next slide. So these are ways to support employees with autism in the workplace. Communicating clearly, making accommodations, and understanding stimming. We'll get to that part later. But with clear communication, it's like we don't like surprises. We like to have we like stability. We like routine. We like to know what to expect. So having all those tasks outlined, where everything's very clear, because anything that is surprising can feel disruptive. We like to know already ahead of time what to expect. It's almost like psychologically we have to be prepared for whatever it is we have to do. Anything that surprises us can throw us off. For example, another way of clearly communicating in a way that supports employees with autism in the workplace is making sure that the leadership and the team know the preferred communication style from the very beginning of that for that employee with autism. Make sure that the office rules and practices are very clear. That it's not we're not very good with gray areas. We like it like to put it one way, like black and white, where everything's very clear and taking the guesswork out of things. So sharing these things verbally and written, because it's nice to be able to read as a reminder. And we always like to have direct and positive feedback, which is like, you let me know if I'm doing a good job, pulling me aside and oh, you're doing great, or you have to work on this, or try working on this, rather than you're doing this wrong. It's like, no, try working on this and it'll be better. So those are little things that help. Making accommodations. Some of us are sensitive to noise, loud noises. I don't like the sound of buzzing, for example. Sometimes there are certain lights I don't like fluorescent lights, for example. So if you can allow people on the autism spectrum to wear the headphones in case there's any sounds, or if they need to be focused on a task, then to allow people with autism to wear their headphones. Also sunglasses. Sometimes it's like light's too bright and it can be a little overwhelming. So for example, I like dim lights, or at least or soft lighting, rather than like the bright white light that can be it can have a very negative effect for a person on the spectrum. Respecting personal space. This is very interesting because I've met people on the autism spectrum, like when I've gone to conferences where they're like, we were talking and then all of a sudden they're like walking way too close to me, and they're on the spectrum. But there's opposite of where it's like people who want their space, or we freak out, or we just not freak out, we just don't like it, so that respecting that personal space is very important. And when in doubt, just ask. It's always okay to ask. And one thing that's very is becoming more common as we know more about autism is allowing for there to be a quiet space where we can be away from sensory distractions, because sometimes we can get overwhelmed. Too much stimuli in the environment. Now I'm going to get to the really interesting part that a lot of people may not understand, which is stimming. Stimming, what is stimming? It's like when you, for example, you have, for example, maybe I like to have this to help me relax or think. It's when you make certain, a person on the spectrum makes repetitive motions. It's something that allows a person to feel on the spectrum, to feel centered, to feel relaxed. Sometimes we walk back and forth. So all that is stemming sometimes with what we do with our hands. And here are the examples, as I mentioned: rocking, flapping hands, snapping fingers. Never actually seen someone snapping fingers, but I've seen pacing, people who just have to get up and walk around. It's very helpful. It helps us cope with stress. Sometimes we repeat words or phrases because we want to make sure that we're well, at least for me, sometimes I'll repeat what I hear to make sure that I understood and that the person knows that I understood. And also we sometimes avoid eye contact. So if like we're not looking, it's not that we're not paying attention. It's like we're trying to have a concrete sense of these abstract concepts. And sometimes I visualize by looking away. Otherwise, I'll get distracted if like you have a freckle over here and I'm like distracted. Little things like that. Sometimes we like to rub our skin or scratch, twirl, other things that might seem, not very common for people who are not on the autism spectrum. Okay, next slide, please. Anyone have any questions before we go on, before we tell our story? Because Shelly and I do have stories about working about our workplace and our experience with disabilities. And then if not, we can move on.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions come up just yet. So folks might need a moment to think through, but we would love to hear your story. And I imagine some will come up as a result of that. Thank you.
Okay, so Hyra, I can start. So as you said, Andrina said, I'm a clinical social worker, and I've been at the medical school for a long time, and I sometimes use a scooter to get around. And I would have issues with bathrooms, right? So I can't, the Mailman Center, the building where we work was built in the 70s. So it was way before the ADA. So there's really minimal accessible bathrooms, and a building I was in before the Mailman Center, also no accessible bathrooms. So it's really interesting. And we're in October, so it's Disability Employment Awareness Month, in case y'all didn't know. And we have a lot of talks this month at the But my prior supervisor asked me, like, what do you need to make this bathroom work for you? And I just said a raised toilet seat. So they bought me a raised toilet seat to place on the bathroom. So a lot of the accommodations that you may think of for people with disabilities aren't really that costly if you're creative about it. Now, the building that I'm in now, on the floor that I work on, also the toilet seat was pretty low. So they redesigned it. So they actually reconstructed one of the toilets. It's a shared, bathroom for the whole floor. So I advocated for myself, and there's other people with physical disabilities in my building. So it wasn't just an issue for me. It's an issue for all of us with mobility disabilities. Another thing that has come up, work at a big public hospital campus, is parking. So that was another time that I needed to advocate for myself, because when I moved into the Mailman Center, it's kind of crazy because the Mailman Center is a center for children with developmental disabilities, and they don't have any close by accessible parking for their staff or faculty, let alone parents, right? Or people that come to visit the Mailman Center. It's very complicated. So I had to advocate to get a parking spot right behind my building. So talk about stress, right? And here is something that everybody has access to. It was just a little bit more complicated that I had to, go up the chain, and, my supervisors were all for it, of course. But it was finding the location as to where I would park. So they worked out something for me that I was able to have a spot in the valet parking, which is right on the Debbie School, which is like right next to the Melmoth Center. So I kind of got my own spot, but it took time and energy. And as we're talking about in this series today is think about it before. But now, of course, the Melmoth Center is stopped because it's a already a building that we before the ADA, but it's challenging, and it's can get kind of frustrating when you as the employee are always having to be proactive. But most often the accommodations are not a big deal and not expensive. Those are just two of my accommodation stories. I'm sure there's more, but I want to give Jairo a chance. And Jairo, I am Jairo's supervisor. So I just want to share that for me, I didn't know much about autism. I'm working with somebody with autism. So Jairo, how was it for you coming in to work at the Melmoth Center, and how did I handle it, to get to know you, what you needed, your accommodations?
Really quick, just to get, I want to give a sense of what the Melmoth Center is. And it was built, a little brief history, it was built in the early 1970s, like 72, 73. So.
Yeah, I think so.
And so the architecture at the time was different. This was before the ADA, which was cited in 1990. So, with that in mind, the Melmoth Center is named after the Melmoth brothers, who had a niece with developmental disabilities. And so that's how they created the Melmoth Center. So we were all about the pediatric care, but we like the lifespan approach, which is, children grow up, go through adolescence, then become adults, and then they age, and we become middle-aged and elderly and so forth. So we like to have the lifespan approach. When I no, Shelly, you did great, when accommodating me. But it was thanks to Project SALT, our self-advocate leadership training, where back in 2013, I was going through a lot of anxiety and depression. I didn't know why. I got a therapist. That therapist recommended that I see a doctor. Before my autism diagnosis, I was misdiagnosed as bipolar, which meant I took medications that were not right for my condition. And then I got once my therapist learned that, it's like, no, you're getting a second opinion because you're not bipolar. There's something else, but she didn't tell me. That's when I was diagnosed with autism. And she recommended I go to CARD, the University of Miami, Nova Southeastern University, Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. There's offices in Gables campus and in Nova University. I went, I am a client at CARD. I also work on their constituency board, but that came later. And at first I had a hard time accepting my diagnosis. It was a late diagnosis. I'm like, why am I finding out about this now? Why didn't I know about this before? When I did Project SALT, and it was a 3-day intensive cross disabilities, I remember at first I was still a little focused on myself, like, wait, why am I didn't like my diagnosis, but I noticed there were other people in the room who were also doing our advocacy program. And that's when I noticed it's 3 days intensive all day, like from 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. So they gave us breaks. So in one of those breaks on the second day, it's designed learning to advocate for yourself, advocating for others.
Zoom out a little bit. I'm curious about